Hey there, and welcome to another Fluent English Conversation, the podcast where I talk about a different subject every episode to help you improve your listening, learn more vocabulary, and develop your English skills. So sit back, relax, and get ready to listen to some natural spoken English. Make sure you also check the link in the description to download your transcript so that you can study along while I'm speaking. The subject I've chosen for today is actually going to be a little story from my wedding, and more specifically about the wedding breakfast. The wedding breakfast being the main meal that you have at a wedding. A British wedding is very similar to the ones that you see in all the Hollywood films and stuff like that. So normally you will have the wedding ceremony, which is where you exchange the rings and the vows and you do all of the I do's and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the party afterwards, which is called the wedding reception. Normally, I think it's most common that people get married around lunchtime, so around midday, and then the reception usually goes from just after the ceremony all the way until the evening. But some people do choose to get married in the late afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, and then only have the reception just as the evening part, like a disco. For our wedding, we got married around lunchtime, and then we also had the reception in the same place. Some people will have their actual ceremony in different places depending on if they are religious. So you can get married in a church, and in the UK that is actually legal. So the priest, or whatever the name is for that particular religion, they actually are legally able to marry you, and they can sign the wedding certificate and all of that stuff. So you don't have to go to the registry office to do it in, your local council or something like that. You can go to the registry office and just have a wedding there. That's also perfectly fine. Or the third option, which we used when we got married, was that we had a registrar come to a different venue, and the venue that we chose, and then they did the ceremony there within the same building. A venue is quite an interesting term. I always find it quite fascinating. It literally just means a place where events happen. So if there's a concert, that's a venue. If there's a wedding, that's a venue. So just something I always find quite interesting. And a registrar is somebody who registers the wedding officially on the records and stuff like that. That's why they have that particular title. Rather than going into details of all of the wedding planning, because it still gives me some flashbacks to all of the money we spent and the planning that we had to do, I want to really focus on the food because it's one of my favourite subjects. And actually, we had quite an interesting journey to get to our final meal and how it all works. Normally, the first meal after you get married is called the wedding breakfast, even though it's normally in the afternoon. The reason is kind of because when you wake up in the morning, the first meal of the day is your breakfast. And this meal is the first meal of your marriage. So it's the idea that that's kind of the fresh start. So you have your breakfast, no matter what time of day it actually is. It's also very common that at the reception you have a sit-down meal where you actually sit down around tables, and you normally have like a 3-course meal with a starter, a main and a dessert. Some people will also have a buffet or self-service or different things, but I would say that the most traditional type of food is a sit-down 3-course meal like you were in a restaurant. When you are doing your wedding planning, normally you will have what they call a tasting or a food tasting, where you go to the venue and they will present you with different options which you can actually taste, of course, and then you can select which items off a menu you want to actually have for yourself. So normally they have a selection of starters, a selection of main courses, a selection of desserts, and then a selection of canapes, little bite-sized bits of food that normally they will bring around between the ceremony and when you actually have the meal, because normally there's a point where you can have some drinks and people can walk around and take photos and all that kind of stuff. When we did it with ours, we went to a venue that's very close to where we live. It's like an old country house, and the owner was the wedding planner. Planner seems like quite a strong term considering there wasn't much planning going on there, but let's move on from that sticky subject. And when we had the tasting, this particular venue had a policy where you use their caterer. So some venues will allow you to hire whoever you want to do the food. You can basically just find a company, you can find a van where they make pizzas, you can do whatever you like. Other places will basically say that you have to use the people that they recommend or the companies that they work with. In this case, that's what they did. And we were pretty happy with that. We didn't have a fixed idea on what we really wanted for food, so we were happy to just go with that. When we went to the tasting, there was a selection of different food, and to be honest, we weren't massively impressed. The quality of the food wasn't amazing. The options were kind of a little bit boring. It was a piece of roast chicken and some potatoes, or an egg with a very strange crispy coating, which I'm not a big fan of anyway. We did it, and then there was enough selection there that we managed to find stuff that we were relatively happy with and that we didn't feel like we were being completely ripped off. And then we chose that. After that tasting, I can't remember how long it was, but before we got married, obviously, we got a phone call from the owner and the wedding planner saying that there had been some kind of falling out. There'd been a problem that she'd had with these caterers, and so now they no longer worked with them, and we had to basically completely start again and meet somebody else, and it was all a bit crazy. And we tried their food, and their food was terrible. We just weren't happy with the options. Thinking about it, I don't even know if we tried it. I think they showed us the menu and we were just like, no, we're not doing this again. The menu's terrible. It's still very expensive. So we turned around to the wedding planner and said that we want to choose our own menu and then they can just serve us that. And we tried to think of something that we would really like, something that was kind of special and unique for us, and something that's very difficult to mess up. And what we ended up going for was our own version of an afternoon tea. So if you know anything about English food, afternoon tea is a very quintessential English thing where you have a selection of sweet and savoury food, and normally you drink it with tea. This might sound a little bit crazy, it might surprise you. I don't actually drink hot drinks, I don't drink tea or coffee, but the food part of it, I'm a big fan, so we went for that. And basically what we had was a cake stand. So you know, one of those things where there's like different layers and you can hold it with a handle at the top. Often you'd have a selection of cakes on it. We actually had a savoury one for the main part of the meal, if you like, and then we had a sweet one for the sweet version, so the dessert. We didn't have starters and stuff, and what we agreed was that they would bring out one of these cake stands for each table, and it would have enough food for everyone who was sitting there. And actually what ended up happening was that they made so much that halfway through they just came out and they started refilling them, so everyone got tons of food, and actually it was probably the best decision we ever made. On the savoury one, we had a selection of sandwiches, which is very common. I think we had the traditional cucumber sandwich, ham, I think cheese and pickle. I can't remember all the different ones because by that point I was so nervous and we'd done the ceremony, I ended up having a few beers and I was more focused on actually just trying to calm down and just enjoy, the start of our married life. But we had a selection of sandwiches. We had some savoury muffins. So if you think like a sweet muffin with chocolate or blueberry or whatever, like that, but cheese. I think there was a cheese one and a spinach one. And then we had sausage rolls and pork pies. These two things, these pastries, are two of my favourite things, and I will literally have them at any opportunity. A sausage roll is literally a sausage with puff pastry wrapped around it, and a pork pie is a pork filling, then it's surrounded by gelatin from the pork, which doesn't sound good, but it really is delicious, trust me. And then it has, I believe it's called a water crust pastry. So it's a special type of pastry. I actually don't know how to make it because I'm not a baker, but it's kind of hard and a little bit salty, and yeah, it's amazing. I love it. If you end up ever coming to the UK, you have to try a sausage roll and you have to try a pork pie. If you don't, I'm going to be very, very disappointed. And we had these, and that was the savoury one. And It was brilliant. And everyone told us afterwards how they loved the food. It was really relaxed. They didn't have to worry about sitting down and having like a full plate of food. They could just have whatever they fancied, which was really, really fantastic. And because they had these platters afterwards where they brought around all the spare food they had, if people just wanted a load of sandwiches, they could have sandwiches and, they could choose whatever they liked. So it just meant that everyone was really full and nobody was sitting there wishing that there was extra food, which sometimes we've heard happens at weddings. On the sweet one, we had, I believe, a selection of different flavoured macaroons or macarons. Again, I'm not a baker, so I can't really remember exactly what the difference is. And it's all French to me, very literally. And we also had some brownies and I think a little tart. So we had a selection of different cakes. There were also scones and chocolate eclairs as well, which were amazing. By the time we finished, I literally was stuffed and I couldn't eat any more, which meant it was time to start drinking some alcohol and getting on the dance floor. But it was really nice, and it's funny how these situations happen where, it feels like there's a big problem and everything goes wrong. And actually, looking back on it, if we'd have got the food we originally signed up for, it wouldn't have been nearly as nice, and it would have made the day much less unique, because we really wanted to make the day unique for us, because we didn't have a huge wedding. We had about 50-60 people, and we wanted to keep it just to really close friends and family and keep it really intimate. And for the food, we wanted it to be something that was special to us, so it wasn't just the standard menu that you just chose. In the same way that the cake that we did, we actually found one online, and it was a two-tier sponge cake. One was lemon and one was Victoria sponge, which had jam and cream. And the outside was coated in a white chocolate ganache. Again, I can't really explain what a ganache is, but it is just white chocolate, basically, that was a layer around the outside of the cake, which kept everything nice and moist and amazing. And also, because it's chocolate, it tasted really good, because we're not a big fan of royal icing, which is that thick icing that you normally get on like a birthday cake and stuff like that. And when we were speaking to the woman who made our cake, she basically showed us all these different options, and she said, hey, you can have this chocolate one and I'll make it and I'll put it in the fridge the day before, and it means if you're getting married and it's a really hot day, it's not going to melt and go everywhere and cause a big problem, and it will stay in perfect condition for all of your photos, and it tastes really, really good. And it was exactly the same price, so it was a no-brainer, really. Apart from that, the only other food we had was fish and chips in the evening, which was an absolute disaster. And it came and it was cold, and just absolute disaster. But by that point, I'd had a few too many, and I was a little bit tipsy, so I didn't really notice so much. And it's something that we don't often mention in the house, because it's something that my wife would still get very annoyed about. So let's just, forget about that for now. I thought this would be a really interesting topic, because I know that weddings around the world often can look very, very different, and I think the way that we did it was very special to us. For example, we went to my sister's wedding and she had the traditional sit-down meal, and she had a huge number of people, and they had the sit-down meal, and in the evening they had like a full buffet. But I've also been to some people's weddings where they didn't do a sit-down meal at all. They organised their own buffet of normal party food, of sandwiches and some crisps and stuff like that, because they didn't want to pay for lots of expensive food. So it really does depend. But we don't tend to do things where you go to a restaurant and you have all the people going there, that I know is quite popular in lots of different places. So I thought this might be a nice way of sharing a little bit of British culture, a little bit of my history, and another opportunity for me to talk about food, which is always nice. That's it for today. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little story about my wedding, learning a little bit about British food and British weddings, and hopefully you found some interesting vocabulary along the way. If you have any ideas for anything you want me to discuss in a future episode, put a comment below and I can add it to my list. But I would just like to say, have a fantastic week, have a great day learning English, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon.